of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 15. Assumptions. Returning to the cafe, their purchases in hand, Izuku had bought 2 copies of the latest manga so that Hitoshi, bashfully thrilled, could have one alongside a cute cat anime character to have as the eatery's unofficial mascot. Damn, he wondered how the boy's big heart fit in such a small chest, and as they merrily laughed, discussing what they were having for lunch, teriyaki chicken with tsukemono and gohan, because eating healthily was important, and serving preserved pickles with freshly steamed rice would keep them fuller for longer, everything seemed perfect. Then he'd felt his eyes narrow at an unfamiliar car parked in a side street they'd just passed, its engine rumbling in a low purr. Upon careful concealed inspection through his long waves of hair, he could see that it was a big, flashy, expensive American-looking thing in hot rod red and royal blue with dark-tinted windows. Did it belong to a pimp? A drug lord? A shady official with more yen than sense, looking for one of the many brothels that pepper the area? Not being too sure, he'd collect the license plate just in case, and text a reminder to himself to check his CCTV later. For regardless of the good things he was trying to foster and provide for this neglected part of Musutafu, there was no denying the criminal element still stinking up the place. Worse still, the bastards who allegedly ran the place didn't seem to care about the time of day they decided to seep out from underneath the shadowy buildings, dingy bars, and crooked pachinko parlors that ensconced the area. The only blessing was that many of the lowlives kept to themselves and didn't bother any kids for the majority. They'd learned a few decades ago that the National Hero Association wouldn't tolerate anyone actively targeting children, and thankfully, most kids were able to defend themselves these days. It still grated on him that they were allowed to haunt the lives of ordinary people, though. However, he couldn't realistically order the local pros into action against the thugs he saw skulking around, or appeal to the overstretched police force to root out, clean up, and disband the gangbangers, drug pushers, and other peddlers of human misery without evidence. Could he? As much as he believed in the legal system, and followed most rules to the letter, he'd seen what happened to people who didn't, and if his cafe was to be successful, then he needed all of his bases covered, didn't he? Sometimes the irrationality of it made him want to spit. That and the justice meted out these days rarely fell in favor of the truly innocent, because as wrong as it was, money still ruled over everything. Yes, being guilty today seemed to boil down to who had the better lawyers, didn't it? The most sickening part of such an arrangement was that the villains and criminals who had the yen to win their cases accrued their wealth from the victims of their cruelty and laughed as they, the addicts, the sex workers, the poverty-ridden people who scraped and scrimped to live, were carted off to prison. It was wrong. So wrong. And if he'd had the money for it, he would have entered the viper pits that was modern law as a profession to effect the changes he felt were warranted. However, he'd never been accepted into that world or society, and no account orphan had no place in the government, did they? No. But at least he could do something. Hell, even something as small as taking 3 boys to the mall to brighten their day and lighten the invisible, emotive weight they all had roped around their necks like an albatross from that poem he'd had to study in his advanced English classes when he was Dobby's age. For looking at them now, you wouldn't think that Izuku was eaten up by his lack of a quirk, or that Hitoshi lived in a broken home that his mother was desperately trying to stitch back together for him, would you? Even his lodger, now pleasantly chatting with the iris-haired boy atop his shoulders, whilst the forest-haired tot swung between the secure swing that their arms had made for him, seemed lighter, his free hand holding the bag of games he was promising to run them both through later. Something told him, from the way he was so naturally at ease with the boys, that he'd filled the role of Nissan before. It made him wonder where those younger siblings were. It made him question what kind of hell they could be trapped in. It made him want to ask, but he had to be cautious. There was a fine line between helping people and butting in, wasn't there? Oh, Aizawa-san, may we please have some cake with lunch?
only if you eat all your vegetables and have some fruit to go with it," he replied, as after a quick look to his lodger, they swung the giggling child between them for one final big sway, his little legs happily kicking at the air before they landed him safely onto the concrete. "You got a deal, Aizawa-san?" the freckled child chirped, whilst Tatoshi was gently eased next to him. "Even green peppers taste good when you cook them." He grinned. "Hey, flattery, huh?" Then, his hand passing the keys to a delightedly excited Tatoshi, he gestured for the boys to scamper to the door, the bear laughing and admiring the black cat keychain Dabi had insisted that he have, whilst he cast one last look around. The car he'd spied earlier had crept around the corner and parked only a few feet away. You okay?" Nodding at his employee, he gestured for them to keep moving, their images mirrored in the tall, wide windows of his establishment, whilst the children in their care cheered and pushed the door open, the little bell's chimes ringing out into the relative quiet of this warm summer's day. If some ballsy dickhead thought he could get the drop on him and attack him and his the kids, then they'd have another thing coming, wouldn't they? Considering that he was supposed to be the #1 pro hero, Yagi Toshinori knew that he was, in fact, an actual coward. "Could we?" "Goodbye, sir."
Beep, beep, beep. Sighing dejectedly. He didn't dare meet the caustic gaze of his sidekick and dear friend as they sat in the relative quiet of the slenderer hero's agency. The blonde slumped into the executive car he'd previously so excitedly perched in and somberly spun in a slow, disappointed circle. He'd so wanted the adorably gruff man to attend his birthday party and supply the desserts. No other muffin he'd tasted since could compare to the batch Aizawa-san had baked, and he was certain if he ever tried any more of the roguish man's confections, that he'd quite happily only eat them in the future. "Isn't moping beneath you, senpai?" Shrugging massive shoulders, he finally stopped his scented spiraling and looked to Mirai, his lips pulling that awkward pout that both Nana and Torino-san used to berate him for. "You are aware that technically he hasn't said no to making anything at all for you, right?" Blinking, his head cocked to the side, Toshinori realized that from the moment he'd heard that whiskey-over-gravel voice say that the request he'd made was irrational, and that he had no interest in attending his function, he'd been almost too heartbroken to listen. "Huh?" "You're still welcome at the cafe," the golden-eyed man huffed through an exasperated chuckle. "And he told you to talk to him in person, so surely that should make you happy." He said that?" "I'm not your secretary, apparently," the other quipped before a quiet mutter of, "At least someone realizes this," a sly smile curling his lips. "He's quite the interesting young man, isn't he?"
"Ah, you think so too?"
the powerhouse mused, his expression now pleasantly contemplative until,
"I'm not sure how I could face him after this. I have offended him without meaning to, thrown my weight around, and
he sighed, his crestfallen aura returning.
"I've never met anyone so...
unenamored by you?" Mirai chuckled, his expression rueful as they regarded each other.
Yes, that's it,"
the taller hero enthused.
"It's terrifying and invigorating,"
he admitted, a smile stretching his lips once more. "Well then, what are you waiting for?" The leaner of the two grinned, his brows arching wryly. "Go down there and speak to him and make a more rational order," he suggested with a mild shrug. "The worst thing that can happen is him saying no again, surely."
"But what if he does say that?" he queried. "Maybe it's best to just leave the issue altogether."
He mourned, his head now in his hands, whilst his tongue desperately tried to remember the taste of those delectable muffins. He can almost smell them. "You must be careful," the younger man tittered. "If any villain hears that you've been plotted by a gruff little cook who's treated you like a person instead of an icon, then they'll be flooding that poor man's cafe and asking for pointers." He smirked.
"Ha, ha, ha." The sun-kissed warrior deadpan that pow returning.
And I would never allow such a terrible thing to befall Aizawa-san and the Norodeko.
He promised before his impressive form standing, his expression fiercely, resolutely determined.
But yes, you're right, my friend, he proclaimed. I should see this as an obstacle to overcome, a quest I must endure, a battle...
I didn't mean...
A battle that I shall win!
He boasted before strutting toward the office's exit, a puff of steam leaving his nostrils as he punched his right fist into his open left palm, the dog tags laying atop his white t-shirt jangling as his booted feet marched his khaki cargo panted legs towards his inimitable victory.
Johnny Mirai-san, and thank you once again for your excellent advice and steadfast support,
he called triumphantly. Then his hulking body swiftly moving, it was Mirai's turn to sigh. That lovable idiot. Good luck, he breathed into the empty room, his mind's eye summoning up an image of the charmingly blunt eatery owner. I believe that you're going to need it. Being mindful of Aizawa's errands, and knowing that the other didn't want any media attention, would wonders never cease. He could hardly believe that the corny, silly photograph that Bubble Girl insisted on taking, not that he needed convincing in the spirit of fun, wasn't splashed all over the internet. He decided to lay low. Therefore, he drove a car that was registered under his true name, and not under his hero agency, that had darkened windows and was just big enough to hide himself in. Sure, it was a little noticeable in an area other than Tokyo, but he couldn't exactly just walk around without people noticing. He tried the Clark Kent thing that he'd seen in his favorite American comic books and found that, sadly, a simple disguise of glasses, a different hairstyle, and two-piece suit did precious little to convince the populace that was just an ordinary man. It had been worth a try, though. Not that he didn't love the man, the symbol he'd become, though. To have the power necessary to fundamentally shape and change his beloved homeland for the better was beyond his wildest boyhood dreams. To have known and been loved by Shimura and Nana, his own mother having died when he was young, was a blessing he would never take for granted. Not that he took his adoring public for granted either. No, he could and would never let them down. Not while there was breath in his body, but who'd have thought that he, a kid from a quiet suburb in the back end of Tokyo, would ever rise to such heady heights? Who'd have thought that he'd crave the anonymity he'd spent an entire childhood bemoaning? Who'd have thought that he, a man famous the world over for his smile, charisma, and positive attitude, would long for the opportunity to simply walk down a street, go into a cafe, and enjoy a coffee with some cake? To enjoy an actual intimate birthday party amongst those he loved and cared about, as opposed to hosting an event where the wealthy had paid to schmooze with him, his body posing on demand for photographs, his smile spread for the entertainment, and him not minding, not truly, because their yen would go to better causes. Causes that, regardless of his fame, power, and prowess, still existed in the country that he loved so much. The country that he died for, if he needed to, when that time would eventually come. Ma! Aizawa-san! May we please have some cake with lunch? Blinking out of his thoughts, Toshinori realized that his quarry had returned from whatever errands he was running, and as he watched, as his eyes followed the group, and he couldn't help the warmth that flooded his chest.
Only if you eat all of your vegetables and have some fruit to go with it.
From there, having already walked past his car and moving swiftly towards the cafe, was what he'd been fighting to protect since the day he'd first taken hold of Nana's hair and reverently ate it as she'd watched him, her smile radiant, as he promised to use her gifts and those of the others for the greater good. The greater good of family and friends enjoying something as sweet, as simple as strolling together unafraid and laughing. Swallowing thickly, he continued to gaze, almost spellbound, whilst the unlikely, yet strangely perfect gaggle of people contentedly went about their way, a radiant child swinging whimsically between the two taller people, whilst another boy, his smile joyous, straddled strong shoulders and cheered at the prospect of something as ordinary as eating. Curious, and perhaps more than a little envious,
He carefully drove his car around the quiet, pothole-littered side street he'd sheltered in, the lyrics of one of his favorite songs still humming from the radio, whilst the children danced away with a set of keys to no doubt open the brightest building amidst the veritable concrete jungle that loomed all around it.
Come on, Yogi,
he murmured to himself.
You can do this.
Sending the boys to wash up in the cafe's bathrooms. He only used premium hand wash in there, and despite his dislike of such thing, the booth, sinks, and toilets themselves were spotless. The bag of video games and other wonderful things to keep them entertained sat in a gaming station amidst the bing bags. Shouta let out a breath. It wasn't worth getting the coffee machine, beloved as it was, sputtering and jittering to life just for him, was it? No, that'd be an irrational use of resources and energy, and no, he wasn't letting any of those children touch even a sip of the admittedly glorious caffeine that the ancient machine was capable of producing. God, Izuku's energy levels would have it bouncing across a ceiling, and Itoshi needed more sleep, not less. That one doubled for Dabi.
Tea it is.
He muttered, his right hand shoved in his jeans back pocket to snag his, now iconic, according to his lodger, Hello Kitty bauble so that he could shove his hair up and out of the way. Just because this eatery was officially closed at the moment didn't mean that he'd slack on the health and safety front. No one, especially not the boys in his care, would be getting sick on his watch. Thank you. Tap, tap, tap. Blinking, his head tilting away from the service bar that he'd been absent-mindedly inspecting and making sure everything was set up and ready for Monday morning's breakfast rush. He could grab more napkins and takeaway boxes. The kids probably wouldn't mind stamping a few prints on them, right? But he looked to the door, and Shouta felt a headache forming. His 7'2" goodness only knew how many pounds worth of headache. However, the guy had come himself, hadn't he? No fanfare, no paparazzi, no costume. Good. Walking to the door, he swiftly unlocked it and allowed him inside with a gesture. The main overhead lights weren't on, so hopefully any passers-by would clock the #1 pro sidestepping into his cafe. He needed to look into widening the door if his visits were going to become a habit, wouldn't he?
Aizawa-san, I'm sorry to bother you.
No, you're not, he stated, his right brow cocking. If you genuinely didn't want to bother me, then you wouldn't be here in the first place. And you're not a bother per se. You're just someone who clearly doesn't know what opening hours are, he advised before making his way behind the service bar, their eyes locking.
So why the visit?
He asked.
Oh, well, firstly, I wanted to apologize to you in person. Apologize,
he repeated bluntly.
For what exactly?
He pushed.
For having your associate speak for you? For inquiring my personal cell phone number without my explicit consent? Or for assuming that your status in society automatically entitles you to have what you want, when you want it?
Watching as the hulking man almost shrank in on himself, Shouta huffed.
All of the above, I take it. Yes, apology accepted.
He shrugged.
However, if you're here to make that same request in person, then I'm afraid you come all this way in vain.
He told him frankly.
An order of that size is beyond what I am willing to do. But a smaller order is possible so long as you or someone you trust is willing to pick up the food at a specified time.
He added.
You'll forgive me just like that? Why wouldn't I?
He blinked.
From what little I know of you based on our previous encounter, you're a well-meaning man who didn't intend to cause offense.
He reasoned.
Furthermore, you had the integrity to come here to make an apology in the first place.
He mused.
Many people with your kind of status and influence wouldn't have bothered.
He continued mildly.
Refusing to accept an apology freely given, and obviously meant, would be irrational at best and petty at worst, wouldn't it?
Aizawa's on you. Oh my god! Oh yeah, Izuku was still here, wasn't he? Turning his face towards the opened toilet doors. Because he wouldn't miss this reaction for the world. Shouta watched as the forest-haired child pointed a shaking, jittery finger at the now, good lord, preening and posing symbol of peace, whilst the Toshi, similarly starstruck, gawked at him. Dabi, however, looked just as nonplussed as he did.
All right.
he began, his eyes still fixed upon the chats.
This is Midoriya, Izuku, and Shitsu Hitoshi. He introduced, Izuku is quite possibly your number one fan, and I'd be willing to bet my cafe that he'd fight for and win that title if he had to.
He chuckled.
Midoriya Shonen, Shitsu Shonen, what a pleasant...
Sighing, his head shaking ruefully, because why was he not surprised? The erasure quirk user watched as both boys passed out in a dead faints, their small forms caught by a bewildered-looking Dobby.
Oh my, are they alright?
Yeah, they'll be fine, he assured whilst hopping over the privacy gate and jogging towards his lodger whilst the taller, broader man tentatively followed. Once he'd reached them, he carefully removed them from the flame quirk user's arms and gently deposited them onto the beanbags.
Well,
he sighed.
You've gone and done it now.
He chuckled.
Make yourself comfortable while I fire up the coffee machine.
He ordered before looking to the 16-year-old.
You want to head upstairs and sort out what you're going to wear for when you know who visits tomorrow?
Bulking, the tense, nervous energy he'd seen building around the other's frame melting under the gentle tasing, the dark-haired boy snorted out "Very funny, Dad," and walked past him after giving the powerhouse a tentative nod.
I'll call you down when lunch is ready, alright?
Got it. Snickering a little despite himself, Shouta then regarded the hesitantly sitting man who'd inadvertently caused such a fuss.
I'll make a teriyaki chicken with side dishes.
He told him.
Would you like some with a cup of coffee and a slice of devil's food cake?